Folks, welcome back for the second talk of BrowserStack Summer Learning. Before I hand it over to our next speaker, Amir, a couple of housekeeping items for those of you who are just joining us. Amir will be taking questions at the end of his talk. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes. We encourage you to ask your questions as and when they come up using the Q&A button on the Zoom interface. You can find it at the bottom right. All talks are being recorded and will be shared via email and posted on YouTube after the two-day event. With that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Amir from Cypress. Amir currently leads the developer experience team at Cypress. Before joining Cypress, he architected and developed systems with large enterprises for aerospace and energy storage applications. Today, Amir is spending his time challenging the status quo of how software is built and delivered to the web through his work at Cypress. Amir, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining me today on a nice little time for us to chat about testing and specifically about Cypress. Because of the dedicated audience for this event, I'm familiar that many of you probably have heard of Cypress and know that Cypress is an open source tool for testing anything that runs in a browser, and that's our aim and that's our goal. Cypress is a very forward-looking framework. We tend to have, a lot of different opinions, and we build the tool around those opinions. So we have a kind of a different approach, and I think once you start seeing what Cypress can do and what it has been doing for a while, you start to see our kind of particular approach to testing in general. So, today we'll get a quick glimpse at what Cypress is like today, and we'll also look, we'll take a little bit of time to see where Cypress is going and what the future holds. So we'll have some time to dive into some of those things. Now, we won't get a chance to dive into everything, but I think we'll touch on some interesting topics for today. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll first, yeah.
Sorry, you do have to share your screen. Sorry about that.
Believe. Let's go ahead and I think we should be good now. Great. And let me go ahead and cool. Everything okay now?
All set.
All right, awesome. Let's get on with it. Cool. So we're gonna today take some time to just show Cypress, in action. Cypress is one of those tools that is very visual, and the best way to understand it and wrap your head around it is to actually see it running. So we'll do that. Then we'll dive into kind of the topic of Flake, and we'll get into all the nitty-gritty details about what that is. Some of you may already have an idea, but we'll make sure we're all on the same page. And we'll talk about how Cypress is kind of, combating this major problem to web application testing. And after that, we'll take a quick look at a new API we released recently, and we've been iterating on. And then we'll talk about something completely different that Cypress has not been known to do, and that's component testing. And it's very early days for it, but the team has been working very hard on it. And I like to kind of share with you all our approach to component testing and to kind of leave you with some resources if you're interested in that. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right into everything. So we'll in a sec look at Cypress in action. I'll do a live demo of it. But the thing that always happens when you're presenting, talking about a framework, especially a web-based one, right, is that people always want to know, well, why this framework? Why not some other framework? Why not? And if you looked at the Q&A session for the previous talk, there was a lot of demand for folks to better understand the differentiations between each individual framework. And the good thing is we now live in great times. If you're a web developer and you have to write tests, or you're a QA professional and you're deep in testing, there's never been a better time. We have much better tooling than has ever existed. And all the tools that all the speakers are talking about today are fantastic. And you really have to kind of decide what works best for you, what is going to make you most productive and is most fitting for your team skill set, your deadlines, and what your app and customers really need. Cypress has been, a growing framework. It's been growing in popularity. And I think that's due to in large, because of we really listen to what developers and QA professionals really need to get the job done. And our aim is not to do everything, but our aim is to do all the right things really well. So with that said, why Cypress? Well, one of the first things that people love and when they first discover Cypress is just how easy it is to get started. All you literally have to do is npm install Cypress into your project. There's no additional things to do. There's no upfront configuration you have to do. You simply install it like any other npm package, and you're off to the races. There are no additional dependencies or anything. And once you do that, you can start writing tests and towards your application. You may have one already, like most people, because most people don't get to always work on greenfield projects. We always have to be working on pre-existing applications or sometimes legacy applications. So when you're off to the races to write tests, Cypress provides you with a very simple, readable, and intuitive API. It's almost English-like in some scenarios. And people really love this, and it really eases the learning curve that's required to adopt the tool. The next thing is, which might not make a whole lot of sense, but I'm mentioning it here and we'll dive into it a little bit later, is that its API is backed by an architecture that is very flake resistant. And we'll dive into that. And the next thing is that, and this is one of the key differentiators for Cypress as folks are comparing different frameworks amongst our audience here, is that Cypress offers you an application effectively. It is an app just like any other app on your desktop. It has a UI, it's interactive, and it helps you iterate on tests, iterate as you're developing your application, and also really enhances the debugging experience. You can debug your app and your tests at the same time, and we'll see that a bit. You can even do things like screenshots and video recordings of your test executions as well. And to enhance your ability to really debug and introspect what's going on in your tests, you can even time travel through your tests. You can see how your app behaves as you are executing your tests, and we'll see that in our demo soon. Now it also has this ability to detect flake, and keep that in mind. We'll come back to that later on. And this is all, behind, we also provide a complimentary cloud service, which anybody can use and we provide and build and maintain for Cypress users. Backed by that, which we won't get into today too much, but it provides you a really intelligent way to parallelize your specs. So this was a question in the previous session that came up. So yes, Cypress can parallelize tests across your CI machines and that you have available. And this is actually really simple to do. We won't have time to dive into it today, but check out our docs. It's pretty easy to get up and running. In addition to all this, everything's backed by a great documentation set, and we take a lot of pride in that. And we now have a dedicated team focused on improving documentation, providing better learning resources, better practices for all sorts of skill sets. We don't want to just provide resources for the simple testing scenarios, but also for the more advanced scenarios as well. And alongside that, we have a fantastic ecosystem. There's a lot of folks that write plugins for Cypress. Cypress is extensible, and some of these plugins might actually come up throughout the conversation. And I assume that some of the questions that might come up in the Q&A would result in me saying that there's a plugin for that. And alongside all these features, we are blessed to have a large and growing community. Cypress has been on the rise since we brought it out of beta and made it open source. And this has been a fantastic trait of just being around this tool, being around this community, and working at Cypress as well. So this is a very high level view of some of the things that Cypress provides. Now I'd love to show it to you. So we're going to do a demo, and for our demo today, we are going to be using our Cypress real world app. This is a demonstration application that we developed internally here at Cypress for the sake of showing folks, how you take Cypress, the tool, and really how do you embed it into your workflow, your code base. What does it really look like? A lot of times when you're picking up a new tool and framework, there's a plethora of tiny little recipes and examples here and there. But a lot of times when you try to come and implement it within your own code base, there's more work to be done, right? There's more thinking that has to take place. There's a whole lot of things sometimes at interplay. So we wanted to build an app that was representative of what folks are seeing in their real day-to-day jobs. And because we all work on real world commercial code bases for the most part. So this app is aimed to do just that. And I highly suggest, you check it out. It's fully open sourced on GitHub. It's a very popular repository. I suggest that you check out its spec files, CI configurations, just see how everything's all configured. I think you'll find it to be a wealth of helpful knowledge there. So with that said, I'm going to kind of go into a live demo here of it all. Let me see if I can do a share screen here. And cool. And then let's dive into it. So I'm in my editor here, and I have that Cypress real world application up. Don't worry about the code. This is just one of the spec files that I have opened up, and I already have my app server running, I believe, and I want to actually, maybe I can go here and restart Cypress. So I already have this application up and running, which you do need to do when you want to test your application, right? The other thing you need to do is just to start up Cypress. I'm going to clear this out here. And the thing that you got to do to open up Cypress is to call the Cypress open command. And Cypress is an executable, just like any other app in your node modules. And you can use npx to start it, or you can have a custom npm script to start it, however you like. All you got to do is just run Cypress open, and you hit enter, and Cypress is going to do its thing, and it's going to bring up what we call the Cypress test runner. This is that experience. So let's wait for that to load for the first time here. Cool. And let me kind of clean things up here for the sake of demonstration. Cool. Awesome. So this is the experience you get right when you open up Cypress for the very first time. If it's in a code base that already has tests, Cypress will show you this window, and it will show you all the test spec files that you have within your project. And to simply start running a test, all you have to do is click on a given spec. So for example, this is an authentication spec that we have. I'm going to just click on that. And Cypress is going to now start running this spec file. And Cypress is going to provision a browser, Chrome here, version 91 specifically. It's going to spawn that. It's going to load the Cypress test runner, and it's going to load our application into the test runner as well. And it's going to start executing the tests in this given spec file, as you're seeing happen live right here. And we'll kind of break apart this UI and show you the entire testing experience here and what it totally offers. So this is what we call the Cypress test runner, and this is the testing experience it provides. On the left-hand side, this is what we call the command log. This essentially shows you a running log of every test suite and test case that took place, and it shows you every step that Cypress took and all the commands and everything that happened, including assertions, network requests, clicking on elements, grabbing them, whatever that took place within that given test, Cypress will show you a log of that. And on the right-hand side, this is your app. This is your actual app. It's the real thing. It's not some screenshot version of it. It's the full-blown thing, and you can interact with it. And we pull your app in within this iframe over here, and we start executing your tests against it. So let's kind of break this apart. So we have the command log here, which shows everything that took place, and it shows us visiting a given URL, or we're making a certain assertion, maybe things we did in a test hook, in this case of before each hook, even network requests that we're keeping an eye on, and we'll get to our Cypress's network interception API, and it's a new one. We'll dive into that as well, but you get a running list of exactly what happened. And this is very helpful for when you're actually trying to debug, because now in front of you, you have this clear list of exactly what took place and in what order that those things happened. And the cool thing is, I don't know if you all noticed this as I was scrolling my mouse across the command log, is that as I'm scrolling my mouse across this command log, you can see the state of my application change. And this is effectively me time traveling through how my app was behaving and what state it was in before and after each test command took place. So I can know how my app looked like before and after I logged in, before and after network requests went out, or before and after I typed something into input box or clicked something. I can see exactly how my app is being mutated and how it's behaving, throughout the test execution. And the way we are able to do this is that Cypress takes a snapshot of your DOM before and after it executes a command. So we know exactly how your app looked like before a command took place and how it looked like after it took place. For example, if I
Amir, do you mind maybe maximizing the
yeah, no problem. Let me just do that here. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that should be better. Folks, does that work? Yeah, I think that looks good. Thanks.
Great. Awesome. No problem. And yeah, so we were talking about snapshots. So if I actually click, let me click on one of these network requests here. Maybe I'll go into this bigger test suite here. And I have this network request. This is a post request to a user's endpoint here. And I can see, and Cypress will actually give me a little toggle here to see how my app looked like when the request took place, the exact point in time, and then how things look like with my app right after when the response came through. And I can do this, with also I can like pin a particular time, when this get command, which is just grabbing an element from the UI and how that looked like. So this is really helpful. This is really helpful for figuring out exactly what was going on when the test was executing. And this is a quite a shift in direction of how other tools work, where you just run your tests sometimes in this like you kind of just see your app come up, it gets interacted with, and then it gets blown away once you're done. You don't actually get to pause and after the test execution has happened and try to introspect like what actually happened. Where did things go wrong, or how can I optimize something? So this is really helpful. I can live here all day long as I'm iterating through my code, and even as I'm iterating on my code, Cypress will actually automatically detect that and rerun the test. So let me do a simple scenario here. I'll just run this very short test here. It's a very simple one, and you can notice is as I edited my test code, Cypress detected that and it reran the test spec itself. So you got this auto reloading thing, which is super nice, especially if you're used to kind of, the web development workflow of hot reloading and whatnot. And you kind of get this similar experience with Cypress as well. So cool. Now, one other thing that I think is important to point out here is, let me just save that here. I've been, let's let that load, and I can just stop it for now. I'll just stop test execution here. So the great thing is that, and this is one of the things that is a little different with Cypress, is that Cypress is running inside of the browser. So with other tools, they typically run outside of the browser context, right? They're usually interacting with a given protocol. It might be CDP. Cypress does use CDP sometimes for certain things. And or the WebDriver protocol, which kind of you sit outside of the browser. But with Cypress, we do stuff outside of the browser, but for the most part, the test runner is inside the browser context itself. So the test runner is running alongside your application. It's in the same execution run loop as your application. So it knows exactly what's going on within your app, and it can react to it in a deterministic manner and very quickly. So one other benefit of just being right inside of the browser is the fact that, well, we get this other awesome thing that we all love, which is DevTools. So you can just pop up DevTools and be able to do, use the same tooling you use to debug your app and your tests at the same time. But Cypress does a little bit of integration with your DevTools as well. So if I just bring up my console, anytime I click on a given command here, Cypress will output helpful information about that particular command. So in this case, I was trying to grab this, this element, and Cypress just tells me like, hey, this is exactly what was yielded right here. If I look at a network request, Cypress will dump helpful information about the request and response body. So I don't have to go digging around for all that stuff in my network panel or somewhere else, right? It's all conveniently here, and that is another step towards helping you debug. So there's a lot of things that could that go on here, but we won't get to it all today. But I would like to kind of show you another mode of Cypress. We've been just looking at this open mode, which is the interactive mode of Cypress. But of course, when you do things in CI, you're going to run Cypress headlessly, right? You have no need for this visual test runner. So I can close that, and if I bring back up my terminal here, and I'm here, that's the one. Cool. So over here, if I want to now run Cypress headlessly, instead of running Cypress open, I just do Cypress run. That's it. So Cypress really has two commands: open and run. Open opens up the visual test runner, and run does the exact same thing, but it just runs your test headlessly. So that's in behind the scenes, Cypress is provisioning a browser, and let me increase this right here. And we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff in our terminal now. It's picked up the first spec, and it's going to start executing in a little second here, there. And I want to point out one thing in particular that Cypress does out of the box automatically when you're running headlessly here. So Cypress is doing its thing. It's running the test. But notice over here is that it finished processing an MP4 file. So out of the box, Cypress will actually just give you a video recording of your headless test runs, and that's really helpful for debugging. And it's actually it will put them all in a given folder here. So for example, it's already created some of these videos which I can open up. Well, I would need to do them in the Finder. I can open up this particular file, and this is an MP4 file of my actual test run execution that went on headlessly. And assets like this are super helpful in CI because CI is a black box, but your app is highly visual, it's highly dynamic, and you need this visual introspection to understand what went wrong, right? You just can't see it. But since we do video recordings, you can save that asset and you can refer to it out later for debugging. And the Cypress dashboard service also tremendously helps with handling all this for you as well. So video recording is one of the things you get out of the box, and I'm going to just halt the headless recording here. Another thing that Cypress does, in addition to doing videos, is that it will automatically take a screenshot when something goes wrong, when something fails. So at the exact point in time, you'll have a visual screenshot of like, hey, this is what the world looked like within the test runner and your application, which also additionally helps with debugging. Cool. So I think that is about all I want to show with the test runner, and I'm going to switch it back to the keynote here, and we'll continue with the rest of our presentation. Cool. Jay, am I good on the keynote? Everything is shown?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's good.
Cool. So now we've kind of seen some of the differentiations of Cypress. We've got to see how Cypress feels and looks like. And now let's talk about another concept, which is the concept of test flake, which if you've been doing web browser-based testing, you know it's a major problem. It's a major pain point, and it's one of the things that really makes people not like web application testing. And Cypress from day one was kind of, declared war on this problem. And I've been using the term flake, but let's all make sure we're on the same page before we really dive into it. So what is really flake? Here's a given scenario. We run a given test A, for example. We run it and it passes. It goes green. Everyone's happy. Great. Then we change nothing. We don't change the code. We don't change the app code. We don't change the test code. We don't change the infrastructure. We don't change any of the configurations. Nothing changes. So the environment is the same. And we run the test again, but now this time it fails. Well, this is an example of a flaky test, because we gave the test the same inputs, but it yielded completely different results. So this is not determinism, right? And so because because flaky tests result into non-deterministic results, they can really reduce our confidence in our tests and therefore our deployment pipeline, our CI pipeline. And it's like we put all this investment into these things, but the second flake happens, we start to kind of lose our confidence and trust in it. So this is a problem that we just can't really brush off. We really gotta take it on. So from day one, Cypress was kind of architected from the ground up to be cognizant of the problem of flake and the common scenarios that happen within web application testing that can result in flake. So its architecture and its API was really built with this in mind. And let's take a look at some examples of how this is the case. So here's a test case we're using Cypress code. It's pretty self-explanatory, straightforward, but in this scenario, we have like a to-do app, and we have an input box to type in our to-do items, and we want to grab that to-do input box and then type in some to-do A and to-do B, and then it's happy. So it's a very simple test case for a very simple application. But let's look at how Cypress handles selecting and grabbing elements from the DOM, and then how we also handle assertions. So the first thing we want to do, with this test is to just grab the input box that has the class new to do on it, and then we want to just type some stuff into it, right? But underneath the hood, when we want to go just select that input box, Cypress does some pretty advanced things, which is that it automatically awaits the existence of this input box, and it checks for its visibility and its actionability as well. And Cypress does this, for all the elements that you're going after to grab and do stuff with, right? And so this alone, this practice of selecting and properly awaiting elements to be properly visible and properly actionable within the DOM can significantly result flake, because a lot of the times you would have tried to grab some element, but it really wasn't there. And like now it failed. Oh, great. So now it's a timing game, right? You have to exactly time when you want to grab an element, right? But Cypress says, hey, don't worry. The world isn't perfect. We'll give it a little bit of time, and we'll wait it for this element to be in the proper state and form for us to do stuff with it. So Cypress is pretty intelligent in how it grabs elements from the DOM. Now, once we have done something with the DOM, we most likely want to make some assertions around it, right? That's the whole point of testing. So when it comes to assertions, Cypress will automatically retry the assertions. Sometimes you have to kind of, give the app a bit of a time, or you can't just time it perfectly where the time you're going to make the assertion is exactly the time your app is going to behave a certain way. So Cypress will automatically wait for an assertion to be true. Now, Cypress doesn't wait forever. It has, pragmatic timeouts for all of this. But the important thing is that it automatically waits for a particular state that you're trying to assert to come to life within the browser, which is really helpful and really important. And these two things alone significantly reduce the common flake scenarios. And so you're no longer playing this guessing game of like, well, should I be adding a wait or a sleep or something else for my app to behave a certain way, or for my test to behave a certain way, so I can actually get this test to work? You're going to stop seeing yourself do that kind of stuff when you use Cypress. Now, along with all that, Cypress does another interesting thing, which is how it executes your test code, is that it runs your test code in a deterministic manner. So the order of how all these commands will run is exactly how I've written them here. So this makes Cypress more of a declarative API than an imperative one, because Cypress will look at this code and say, not just execute it right away. It just says, okay, this is exactly what you want to do, and this is the order you want to do it in. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. So Cypress makes a deterministic queue of things to do after looking at your commands that you want to run, and then it runs it in that given order. So that's also super important, because determinism is about us all being on the same page of exactly what's going to happen, and we're going to get this particular result. And so this is fundamentally built into how Cypress executes tests. Cool. With all that said, we have a new thing that we released a little while ago to further combat Flake and manage Flake, and that's test retries. Now, the name can be a little self-explanatory, of course. It's just a retrying of tests, but let's go and see what that really means. Cool. So let's go back to our original scenario where we had test A, it passed, we didn't change anything, and then we run it again, now it fails. But because we have test retries, this new feature of Cypress enabled, when a test fails, we will now retry that test a configurable amount of times. So in this case, the test failed, and then we're going to retry 2 more times. So it's going to be up to 3 attempts that we made on this test. By the 3rd attempt, it passed, which is cool, right? Now this test is still flaky. It's considered flaky. The problem of Flake is still there, but the CI pipeline did not come to a halt, which is important. The real world, right? So as I said, this is all configurable. So you can configure test retries. You can do this globally in your Cypress config file for your entire project. And you can do it on a per mode level. So maybe I don't want test retries enabled in the visual runner that I run locally, because I'm just iterating on tests. And I'm not, I don't really care for test retries at that point, but I really do want it when I run it in CI. So that's like the example here on the left. And then Cypress also now supports test level configurations as well. So you can configure at a given test level. Maybe you're just trying to target one particular test that is problematic. So that's the problem right there. So going back to our example here, we tried this thing a couple of times. It's flaky, but we did not halt the CI pipeline, which is good because the CI pipeline kept moving smoothly. We were able to make the deployment. But the thing that test retries did give us, in addition to all that, is that it is allowing us to detect flake, which is something you couldn't really do before. You just knew, oh man, I know that test is flaky. I've seen it multiple times. It's out there. I've seen it in CI over and over again. But now we have a methodology and an algorithm to properly detect when we see flake. And once we see flake, the next logical thing to do is to surface it and stay on top of it, so you can remedy it and share with your team, and you can come up with a solution to how you can resolve it. So this is what we're doing with the Cypress dashboard service, which is a complimentary service we provide to Cypress users, and you can all start trying it out today if you like. You just go to dashboard.cypress.io to play with it, and you can start sending your test results to it, which is what folks do when they run their tests in CI. People send the test results for all their Cypress runs to the dashboard, and it gives them a nice central hub to be able to debug problems that happen in CI. You get those screenshots and flaky screenshots and videos. You get to see the full test status, and you get a whole bunch of other information about your tests, which allows you to really debug your tests in a scalable manner and with your team. Now, going back to the concept of flake within the dashboard, we now, because we can detect flake, we can now surface it to you for every given CI run. So we can say, hey, this particular CI run happened. It had 4 flaky tests in it. And then it's like, oh, wow, I didn't even know I have 4 flaky tests. Let me just jump right in. Let's figure out what we can do with it. Now, it's important to know when a given CI run is flaky, but flake is typically a system-wide problem, right? It happens across your test suite. And so you need to have a really nice bird's eye view of what is going on flake-wise within your test suite. And which is why we provide flaky test analytics as well on top of this, which we can, tell you like an overall flakiness factor for your test suite. We even tell you, which tests have had more severe cases of flake, and the severity levels is based on just how often the test is particularly flaky. And this helps you stay on top of flake, but also prioritize which flaky problems you're going to approach first, second, and third. Because the way to combat flake, there's no silver bullet solution. You have to detect it, and you have to have tools and methodologies to stay on top of it, so you can methodically go through the occurrences of flake and resolve them. And so this is one approach that we've started off with, but we've just scratched the surface on this. So be on the lookout for more things from us on that front. Cool. Cool. So we've talked about how we can, be able to detect flakes, stay on top of it, but we also want to mitigate the introduction of new flaky occurrences into our project, right? Like we want to put a pause on this problem before it even enters our test suite. So let's go ahead back to this example we started with, where we just had a test, we changed nothing, and then we ran it again and then failed. And so therefore it's flaky. Now, the first time we ran this test and it was green, well, at that point in time, this test was flaky. We just didn't know it yet. We simply got lucky here when it passed. So it was all just luck. And, we can't rely on luck because we need deterministic results when we're doing tests, because we need that confidence in our test suite. So we just got lucky there. And so we need to be more proactive in mitigating the introduction of flake into our CI, into our code base and into our CI runs. So we're working on the new feature. Internally, we're calling it test burn-in. But I like to kind of tell you about it because I think it can be really helpful to you all once we do release it. So let's go over here and talk about it. Now let's start with that scenario where we had a test. It was new, test A. It was completely brand new. We wanted to introduce it into the code base. Somebody had added it in a PR or something. But because it's new, we detect that it's new. And then we will make a certain amount of attempts to essentially burn in or break in or rattle the flake out of this test to even see if it's flaky in the first place. So we will make multiple attempts, and you can configure this. Now, the more attempts you make, the higher your level of confidence goes. And that's really all it comes down to, right? It's like how confident are you, how many times you need to run this to have a confidence that, hey, this test is not flaky. So I think that's going to be a heuristics game, and we'll provide more guidance around this as we develop this feature and release it to everybody. But yeah, so in this particular scenario, we ran the test 3 times back to back. Everything was fine, but on the 4th try, it failed. So it's like, hey, we burned this test in and we know it's flaky, and you're trying to merge this thing in. So maybe we should put a halt on it before you merge this PR, and for you to go figure out what the issue really is here before we merge it in. So now, if you burn in the test, you try it all these times, and everything passes, then with a high confidence level, you can be happy to merge that in, and at that point you know that with a high level of confidence that this test won't be flaky, and therefore when you run it again on a different CI run, it's going to be passing, right? So it all comes down to probabilities and confidence levels to kind of suss out flake. Cool. Well, that's our little foray, a little path and adventure into burn-in. Test flakiness. But let us also talk about Cypress's our new API for handling network requests. Now, if you've been a Cypress user for a while, you probably have gotten used to our older network handling API, which only supported XHRs. But we've completely revamped our network handling APIs, and now it supports everything. It supports fetches, it supports static requests, all requests and responses. It's the full-blown thing, and it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility into stubbing and spying network requests. It is actually probably one of the largest APIs we've released, and if you're interested in this, I highly suggest diving into the docs for it. But I'd like to kind of give you a little glimpse into what it does and how it can work for you. So let's say you just want to wait on a network request that took place, right? All you have to do is use the new side.intercept command and pass in the URL of your choice that you want to wait upon. And you can give that URL an alias or a name. In this case, in this first example, we're giving it the alias get settings. And later on, we can refer back to this network request with the side.wait command, and then pass in that alias name and say, hey, in this part of my test, I want to wait for this URL to have properly given a response back before I move on with my tests. So this is how you can wait for network requests to move on. So the API has changed a little bit, and we support kind of all the scenarios that we would have been used to with the old side.route command as well. But now you have new abilities to match URLs as well. So in the first case, it was just a simple string, but you can actually, break things apart and specify like a URL pattern, or you want to filter based on like a certain query parameters. And this, you can really build this out and make very granular and very specific matchers to help you out there as well. So if you're interested in that, more in the docs there. Here are some other scenarios. You can stub network requests. The simplest scenario would be the first one, which is I just want to send a string success when I make a request to this update endpoint, which is very simple, and you probably wouldn't be doing this in real world scenarios. But if you need to mock a network request, you can simply do that in a myriad of ways. One simplistic version of that is here in the second code block, where we're just making a response with a data fixture for like a JSON user's JSON response that we wanted. And this could even be not a fixture, but like just an object, static object that you want to pass. Or you can build that out to not just be the response being mutated, like the response body, but you can also mutate the status code. So you can create problematic scenarios, maybe return a 500 or something like that. Or you can even, change the headers, whatever you would like. And these are all kind of static responses, but you can take it up a notch and you can just dive into, just a raw JavaScript function where you can receive the request and response as arguments into a function. And once you intercept a desired network request, you can do whatever you want with it. You can modify anything about it, modify the response, make assertions, do all sorts of things with it. So this is an API that has a lot of breadth and capabilities. And so if you need to handle the network layer much better, I highly suggest checking out the Cypress Network Interception API. It's very cool. Cool. And let's kind of dive into the last topic of today, which is component testing. So a lot of the tools that we've been kind of discussing in this event have really been around kind of the classic end-to-end style, maybe integration style way of browser testing. But a lot of development that goes on today is done at the component level, and there's a lot of tooling around just handling component tests. And so this is something that users have asked for us, and we've done it in super experimental ways within our community in the past. But we now have a full team behind this effort, and I'd like to give you a quick glimpse at the direction that we're going. So first of all, what is component testing? Well, the simplest way to put it is it's the ability to test components in isolation. And what we mean by that is that you have a component. It could be a React component, or it could be a Vue component. We'll take that component, we'll do all the proper bundling, processing of it, like dealing with your bundler and whatnot, and then we will just mount it into your DOM. But the current way this all works now with other tooling and the kind of the status quo of component testing is that people take their component and they test it in a virtual DOM, which is something like JS DOM or something else, right? Now, this is not a realistic browser. Your users do not use JS DOM or some virtual DOM emulator or something like that to test your application. And we think that things could definitely change in that regard, but we think others could also change when we're dealing with components. So from my point of view, I think the issues with the status quo of component testing is that we just don't have a lot of confidence around some of our tests because we are using these virtualized and emulated implementations of the DOM, and we're not testing in a real browser, which is what our users and customers are using. Now, in addition to that, is the current tooling I don't think has a really good debugging experience, right? You're not getting the same level of fidelity when you need to introspect into the visual nature of components. Which is really necessary. And this also leads into the overall development experience of component-driven of development, because you need to see the full extent of your changes as you're iterating on your code base, as you're iterating on your component, right? So we think we can do a lot here and add a lot of value and have a good amount of impact by increasing confidence in people that people get with their investment into testing their components, but at the same time really empowering people to do component driven testing much better by giving them an overall better experience. So what's Cypress doing? Well, we have a new approach to component testing. It's currently in the early phases, but we have released the experimental version, and you can start using it today. It's already in our documentation. And so let's go ahead and take a look. And I kind of began my explanation a little too soon, but I'll just repeat it here, which is now with Cypress, instead of mounting things into a virtual DOM, we will take a component, properly pre-process it, and mount it into a real browser DOM. So you can test with confidence, and you can see things as you're iterating on the component itself, because you have the browser open, you have your test code on your editor, and you're iterating on the development of your component, the testing of your component. And well, how would this all work? Well, right now, when you want to open up Cypress in test, run your end-to-end tests, you just type in Cypress open. But if you want to do component testing, and this is currently true just for the experimental version, all you have to do is run npx or just Cypress open CT, and CT stands for component testing, of course. And that's all you got to do. And that's how you bring up Cypress's a component testing test runner. That's the only difference in your startup process. And once you've done that, you're going to get a similar testing experience, but with some new additions. And so these are kind of the early versions of it, and you can start playing with it. Now, previously, you would have to kind of select. You would get a window for selecting a spec file, and you would just run that particular spec file. Now, this is the same case, but now we will also show you a spec file selector in the left-hand side, and you can go and click on the desired spec file you want to test, and it will give you the same experience you have in the test runner. And so this is kind of a simple example of all, and here's a little video of it running. And this is just one component being mounted into the browser DOM and being tested. Now, the major difference here, which is kind of hard to see, is that there's no URL, right? That's the difference. So let me go and this is just more screenshots here. But if we kind of dive into kind of the differences of what you used to with normal Cypress and now testing with components in it, is that when you do the typical end-to-end test with Cypress, you would have to visit a URL like site.visit my app, right? But now with component testing, you just have to use mount functions that we provide to mount a given component that you're interested in testing. So for example, if you want to test the date picker component, all you got to do is just import in your component, in this case, a view component, and then pass it into a mount function. And we just mount it into the DOM, and you can just use the same Cypress commands you're used to as usual. So this is the major experience difference for starting a test with component testing. And that's really it. This is, it's in the early phases. The team is working really hard on this, but I highly suggest for you all to check out the docs for it. Go to on.cypress.io/component testing to dive into it if you're interested. And with all that said, I've said a lot of things. Hopefully it was helpful. There's definitely more topics we can cover. I'm really excited to share a lot of other things we have in the pipeline. But for now, we'll end here, and we can take some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome, Amir. Thanks for a great session. I think it's great to see sort of the breakdown, a deep dive into how Cypress works, and actually understanding the why behind why you do what you do, and of course what you have building under the hood. So folks, before we dive into questions, there will be a quick poll you'll see on your screen. Please please take a moment to answer that, yes or no. And we can now dive into questions. Amir, we'll start off with questions around features and support. So there are a few questions around test retries. How does Cypress handle test retries in case of a session failure in between tests?
A session failure in between tests, I would need a little bit more of an elaboration, but if a test fails, Cypress will retry it if you have it in test retries enabled.
Now a question around like more advice. Isn't retrying a test a bad pattern that might mask real issues within the application?
Yeah, so it's a great question and one that comes up. And one thing I will say is with great power comes great responsibility. As I mentioned in my talk, is that, test retries is algorithmically necessary to detect flake, and that's the benefit we get from it. Now you can choose to still merge code in if you detect flake and make it go green. And I can understand the perspective of, hey, I'm just brushing this problem to the side, but that's exactly why in the Cypress dashboard, we surface flake. We don't want you to brush it down underneath the rug. We want you to be aware of it and stay on top of it. And to do so, you really need good tooling to do that. Because even if it gets surfaced, like hopefully you're keeping tabs on it all. So I agree with the sentiment of the question. But test retries is a necessary component for us to actually stay on top of flake and to be able to manage it.
Awesome. Question on the test burn-in feature. Does the test burn happen behind the scenes, or will my test execute X number of times when I'm running it for the first time?
I don't exactly know what they mean behind the scenes. It's the same kind of execution you're used to in, let's say in CI. It's just that when we detect that the test is particularly new or was potentially previously flaky, we will retry it to the configured amount of times to kind of help you build confidence around that particular test before you merge it in.
Awesome. Question around running Cypress within my CI. Does it support? Maybe you can talk about CSE integration. We had a question around Visual Studio specifically.
Visual CI or Visual Studio? Which one?
Yeah.
Oh,
CSE
is he talking about VSTS?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think VSTS service, I think, is now rolled up into Azure DevOps pipeline, which we do support. And in fact, Cypress is completely CI agnostic. It works with all CI providers. And in our documentation, you will now find more extensive guidance around all the popular CI providers, including GitHub Actions, Circle CI, AWS Code Build, so on and so forth. We have some in-depth guides for those services, for several, but we also have plethora of examples for other CI providers as well, including Azure DevOps pipeline. Man, they change the name all the time, but it's definitely supported, and you can check out our docs for some additional help there.
Awesome. Can we run Cypress tests in Dockerized containers?
Dockerized container, yes. That's actually how you run Cypress in CI itself. So yes, you can do that.
Does Cypress support application REST API calls?
Yes. And you can use the intercept API to intercept those REST API calls, to mock them, spy on them, do whatever you want with them.
Can I use Cypress for testing on my staging environment requiring a cert?
Requiring a certification? Yes, and there's actually a new PR in works to kind of help in additionally with that. If you're having troubles, and I would be actually curious to learn more about your particular setup, so feel free to send me an email. I think you can find my email, just my name at Cypress.io.
Awesome, thanks. Question, a bunch of questions around browser support. There's i11, Electron browser, mobile browsers. Maybe you can spend some time just talking about the browsers.
Yeah, sure.
Test on.
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to work to expand the capabilities of Cypress across all browsers. Right now, WebKit has been prioritized for us. We already support Chrome and Firefox. Now WebKit is the next frontier, and WebKit is, for those that don't know, it effectively means support for Safari as well. So that's currently our focus. And in the future, well, we'll look into other browsers as well. Now, one thing I'll say about cross-browser testing is that it's totally understandable that for some projects and some companies, it is absolutely required to maybe test in IE11 or something like that. But if that's not a hard requirement, I would highly advise people to consider the real impact of adding a plethora, excessively adding or testing across all sorts of browsers, as if it does not add to your confidence level, and also it might not fit into the budget and kind of the speed of the workflow that you want, because the more testing you have to do across more browsers is just multiplying the effort and time and cost required to testing things. So I think you really have to gauge like the confidence level that you're after, and also if it's a hard requirement for your users and customers. What we have found actually is that, you know, we get a lot of requests for cross-browser support, and understandably so. But a good amount of data also suggests that a lot of people just need to test, period. Like they weren't testing before because the tooling was not, it was too hard and not too approachable. And Cypress is actually making that, you know, this type of testing more accessible. And that's actually causing people to test, period. Like if they had 0 tests prior. So even having tests in evergreen browsers is a significant boost into what you can get from putting time and effort into testing. So you know, we're going to continue working on that front, and you know, be on the lookout.
Awesome. We are almost out of time. We can take a few more questions, Amir, but there are a lot, so it would be great if you can stick around and answer some of these.
Yeah, sure. And also people can you know, reach out to me on Twitter as well. That's been a popular channel for folks to reach me. So feel free to hit me up on Twitter as well.
Another question around advice on their setup. Is it a best practice to put your side.intercept declarations at or near the top of your spec file? I've been having trouble setting up network spies on a Node Angular app to ensure our pages under test are ready.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of do whatever you like. There's really no particular best practice around this, because your use case will vary. You can check out the Cypress real world app. We actually put a lot of our interception call declarations in the before each hook of a spec, and that's because we want to refer to those interceptions throughout multiple tests, which is why we put it in our before each hook. But sometimes you only need to intercept something within a one given test, which means you just need to declare it in that one particular test. So you know, if you want more like real world scenarios of that, check out the Cypress real world app.
Final question. There's a question around, you know, support for third-party scripting. Are there plans to support it?
Third-party scripting, I'm not clear on exactly what that could mean, but they might be referring to plugins of sort for Cypress, or particularly other ways of writing tests for Cypress. I would need some clarification there, but I will say a bunch of different things, and hopefully that will help that particular person. So Cypress is, first of all, JavaScript only. It's the language we use. With using other languages to write tests for Cypress, if you do need to use kind of Cucumber or the Gherkin to write Cypress tests, there is a plugin for that. It's called Cypress Cucumber. You can just Google that or find it in our docs as well. Some people do use that. So that's potentially a third-party scripting as well. So hopefully that was helpful.
Awesome. Amir, we are out of time. Thank you for coming on board. I think our audience loved hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Folks, and thank you, Al. Appreciate it.